By order of the Right Honorable Judge Hoot Hoot, I, Chamomile, state unambiguously that not all of the werewolves written by Requiem are twinks, and that my insinuations to the contrary were baseless and written out of a fit of pure spite and envy for the breathtaking diversity in both personality and body type of his literary lycanthropes. And werewolves are better than vampires. You and that owl went out and had lunch together as soon as the trial was over.
Hey, you got off light. I was seeking the death penalty. Clearly the system was not rigged in my favor because, I'm not doing this podcast alone. But now we can put this ugly incident behind us and watch another group of bandits fight another group of trolls, because we haven't done that before.
Okay, this is like a merchant, so okay.
Oh, okay. That's more acceptable.
Yeah. He might even have something to say to us after we finish, because he and his guards are friendly.
He does. I think I did this encounter. I don't remember what happens, but I did this encounter. I still don't know why the treasure encounter has not procced yet.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing for treasure. I may just...
I guess you're gonna have to put a twink in charge.
Yeah, I might just put, It's like, I forget the guy's name from Game of Thrones. But, the one who they made... Yeah, the one they put in charge of the Master of Coins.
At the very end?
Yeah.
He was clearly there to embezzle?
Right.
Which of the twinks would do the least amount of harm?
It's like, yeah, we made him the Master of Coins because he likes coins. Which, I guess that's a qualification.
Man, Game of Thrones is a series. That was the TV series. That was an exercise in disappointment.
I mean, for different reasons, but I feel like the same is true of the book series. Those last two books aren't getting written. He set himself a deadline, he committed to it in public, he missed it.
I think that happened like 5 or 6 times at this point.
I only heard about the one that passed earlier this year, or last year at this point, because it is now a new year.
I think that, there's a chance. It's not like King Killer, where the editor has come out and said that she doesn't think it's getting written. Then you get you accidentally removed it.
Yeah, so no, at least I know how to put it back on now. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely not be my world would not be turned upside down if you end up finishing them, It's not the kind of thing where yeah, I will bet literally anything on this because there's no way it's happening. But the only reason I would not bet you $100 that those books aren't getting finished is because it's not clear when I would collect.
Yeah.
When he dies, I guess, but who knows how long that'll take. He's old, but doesn't seem to be in particularly poor health.
The main thing is the TV series has taken a lot of the anticipation out just because of how badly it went. I imagine the book series is gonna end better, but that was just so bad.
Yeah, and there was a thought that he was holding on to the last 2 books, which he may have mostly or completely written already, just because he didn't want them competing directly with the TV show. this long after the end of the TV show, I think we can safely say that is not the case.
Well, and the thing is, they either figured out or directly told the ending. And I imagine he's going to do the ending better than they did, but you still get the fact that how badly it went. Like,
Why not?
like I was not super shocked that Daenerys turned evil, but they didn't pull it off.
The idea
and I think he'll do better.
The idea that Daenerys turned evil, and like you should have seen this coming because her brutality had been steadily escalating for a while now, which is what Tyrion tells us in the end, but is not what they showed. There was a sudden leap in brutality from,
out of nowhere.
Yeah, where like early on she was relatively restrained compared to most characters, and then she was suddenly like beyond Cersei in terms of killing people for no reason. Like,
and I've kind of been cheating with my expectation anyway, because I'm using some out of book knowledge. This is not from a cold reading. This is from the fact that George R. R. Martin was a very early critic of the Iraq War, and Daenerys was a stand-in for Western sort of humanitarian imperialism. So the fact that it turns out bad was always something that was obviously going to happen, but that's based on knowing George R. R. Martin's politics, not from stuff that's in the book. Like, he was out against the Iraq War, like, 2003, I think. So when you've got this white character taking over a coded Middle Eastern city, like, from somebody who is being written by somebody who is very deeply opposed to the Iraq War, right around when the Iraq War is happening, it's probably going to go bad. Like, so that's kind of out of character knowledge. It's not.
Yeah. And it is
and I
like
imagine he's going to build it up more.
And I'm definitely there for a slow descent into total madness. But, it has to be slow enough to be believable. It has to go one step at a time. And I question how well, on the one hand, George R. R. Martin does just love the twist the same way the showrunners did. I know their nickname is D&D. I forget what the D stand for. I just know that I am occasionally briefly confused because that's also the abbreviation for Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, like George R. R. Martin is definitely an overall better storyteller than they are. Like, it's very obvious that they floundered when they no longer had his blueprint to follow. At the same time, he does just love his twists and his turns too much. Which I wonder if that is because he got a reputation for them and decided that it was his thing.
Yeah.
Just because the first Game of Thrones, especially, the actual Game of Thrones book, because the book series is A Song of Ice and Fire, with the first book being entitled Game of Thrones. That one is, extremely tightly plotted and works just as well on a reread as on the first read. Despite Ned Stark's infamously shocking death. Spoiler alert for a book released in like 1996, I guess. Yeah, and in fairness, I did not read this one in context. I read Jon Snow's stabbing out of context. But it was extremely sudden and did not give the time to build, which is very much a, I want to hit them out of nowhere, they'll never see it coming kind of thing to do. And it is much better to, build a sense of dread to this sort of thing. So I am a little bit worried that the suddenness of Dany's fall in particular is the kind of mistake George R. R. Martin seems prone to. But on the other hand, totally botching a character arc like that is the kind of mistake he seems not as prone to. So,
I mean, one thing is that a lot of people miss is that ultimately everybody seeking the throne has a variation on the same mission. Uh, like Daenerys says, I will take what is mine by fire and blood. I will get it by conquest or by birthright. That's everyone's justification for getting the throne. Nobody's justification is actually ideological, like, I'll make a good ruler. The justification for Jon, for Daenerys, and for Cersei is all going to be, conquest or blood. This is a world that exists before ideology. Like, you don't have a justification for rule. You just get to rule or you don't. Like, whoever's in the throne is just, they're all variations on the same theme.
right. And there's definitely something to Daenerys, how she kind of fumbles towards ideology, but ultimately fails to embrace it. Where, she talks a good game about breaking the wheel and such.
The mother, Old Beldam's house is that little, like, dot right above Prince and Grave's portrait. Oh, no, it's not. That's something else. Hers is down to the left of Sullivan, Swampwitch's hut.
There we are. Not sure what that exclamation point is for, but I guess I'll come back to it later.
That's for, there's a wizard there who is doing stuff with the trolls that we can go talk to if we want to.
Let's visit Candlemere Tower first.
I would not. It's got so many overpowered will-o-wisps.
What's the worst that could happen?
They could join our town.
That turned out alright. And honestly, the way that one mostly went is I had them hang out for a while. Kind of quietly hoped I would eventually be able to make that go horribly for you. And then, kind of felt like after a while that, there wouldn't be any way to have them. I don't want to actually spend, 30 minutes doing something that fails miserably. This game is long enough already.
Yeah, I'm like level 7 and I still haven't gotten through it, so.
But yeah, I'm, why do you guys need to sleep so much?
I was like, because I'm drunk.
There's also, they lean too heavily on the hex crawl for a game that is sold entirely on the kingdom building. Like, the way that you can go around and explore new territory, that is good, but the way that you have to, make camp every so often, and there's little camp checks, it's like, no, not necessary. This game is not about exploration. This game is about building. It's different.
Also, I think for your first game, I get the Kingmaker is the most popular. I think you should have done something a little easier. Something like a little more standard adventure, because you were biting off a lot trying to do the kingdom building.
Funny enough, the kingdom building seems to have gone alright. Where they stumbled was on the really basic stuff. Like, UI issues, getting the music to loop properly, which I know I've harped on about, but it's still baffling. Alright, I know how this works. You appear to be slimy and loathsome, but when I treat you well, you will turn out to be a beautiful fairy in disguise and will, grant me a wish or some shit. And if I'm cruel to you, you will turn me into a... I don't want to say a werewolf, because he's some kind of weird bear-cat thing, but...
And we were almost at the point where Sullivan was going to have the best spell. She was almost at the point where she could learn the spell Conditional Curse, which is like Bestow Curse, except it can be done at range, and it can only be broken through a specific condition. So you were going to hear the phrase "True Love's Kiss" a lot more. Right. The owlbear now takes a -6 penalty to strength that can only be broken by the kiss of true love. Because you can do it on animals, and they just intuitively understand what is break the curse. So the owlbear has some intuitive understanding that it needs to find the kiss of true love.
And like, of course, you have to, you have one or two gags about the owlbear trying and failing to find the kiss of true love, but you have to. The third beat on that is that it somehow works. There's like a furry in the town, and after kissing the owlbear and breaking the curse, they're kind of forced to admit that they were a furry all along. And then, they embrace their furriness and run off to live with the owlbear.
Our victory is certain.
Dire boars. I guess we're having pork.
I mean, just attacking random animals in the woods just because they're there has not traditionally worked out well for us in Kingmaker, but there wasn't really a choice on this one. It bugs me in Pathfinder that they decided they were going to go ahead and let cantrips be infinite, but nevertheless decided that But nevertheless decided that they were going to go ahead and keep the damage so negligible that you may as well just use your crossbow anyway. Like, very obviously, the thing to do there was to buff the damage to be comparable to that of a crossbow. Like, you don't have to make it better, but...
Because, like, spellcasters not having to resort to a weapon is, I think, a good idea.
Yeah, it's, if you play a full spellcaster, right, then you have specifically chosen not to be a half-caster like a bard or a paladin or a ranger, so presumably, I'm all magic all the time is your shtick. Or, maybe it was just for balance reasons, because you expected this campaign to be difficult, and you know that bards are legendarily bad classes, so... Not actually the worst, for the record, but... not as good as a full caster, though. I do find it kind of funny that in Order of the Stick, the bard is... they have an entire character where... part of his thing is that whole bard suck meme, but in the same party they have a fighter and a ranger, and both of them are supposed to be perfectly effective, capable characters.
Alon does a prestige class out at some point, so...
It's true, but like it's a whole thing where like, he has now become slightly useful.
I've not played a Pathfinder bard, but I've heard the Pathfinder bards are better. I really like with bards, so I like the idea of having a class that is essentially dipping into a little bit of everything, that is like an adventurer class, which the bard almost does. Like, I think ideally you would drop the music aspect and you would make the magic like not spontaneous casting. Like, it'd be learned instead of like innate.
Yeah, no.
I think the other way to go with the bard is like having it be full on with the music casting and dropping all the little jack of all trades aspects.
Yeah, no, absolutely separate those out. The Red Mage is my favorite Final Fantasy class, and it is just the bard with the music motif stripped out. You know, it's just he can cast a little bit of white magic, a little bit of black magic, and he's also decent at fighting. You know, that's in situations where you actually can choose your classes, which comes up sometimes but not always in Final Fantasy games, but is a staple of Western games. And yet, Western games rarely have a Red Mage type class, which bugs me.
And there's the Maestro Sorcerer Bloodline, which kind of does magic thing, but doesn't do it super great. Like, you get some of the Bard's music class features. They introduced this thing called masterpieces, which were, like, unique pieces of music with, like, bardic music that had different effects, but they were deliberately underpowered, as Pathfinder does with a lot of its stuff. They were not really worth ever getting, which kind of sucks. Like, the idea of, like, oh, this unique piece of music that I have learned or developed has this unique magical effect.
But it's worse than the generic stuff.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
And they had this one archetype that I liked that let you play music that would summon the dead, like essentially doing the Danse Macabre. And they aren't, even though Pathfinder desperately wants all undead to be evil, this one archetype lets you do it without them being evil, but then they retconned it so they're still evil, because undead just automatically have to be evil for whatever reason.
You definitely want an element of danger to the undead. Like, you do occasionally get people who want undead to be just automatons who can... Oh, fucking hell. But yeah, you do occasionally get people who just want undead to be automatons with, you know, who may as well just be robots who follow orders exactly as programmed and have no element of real risk or danger to them. Oh, good, 2. Well, we're going to see what we can do here. It is easy baby mode, so, you know, we'll see. But if you want to do that, then what you want to do is have golems, right? Like, we have just regular automatons. Undead are different from that. But, you know, there's a lot of good fodder for stories of, you know, playing with fire, of, you know, being a necromancer who is well-intentioned and has to manage the risks and may even succeed. Okay, yeah, these will-o-wisps have a ludicrously low AC compared to what they are on the tabletop, so I'm guessing that easy mode just, like, knocks 10 points off or something.
Yeah, because they're ridiculously hard. The ones on Candlemere are some sort of upgraded kind.
Because the regular will-o-wisps weren't enough, I guess. One thing that you can't do in video games that you can do better in tabletop, and...
So there's still some encounter that we're not seeing, right? There we go.
Yeah. It is just cloaking at the end of everything, which is why I bring this up.
If you get close to it, it should, like, become visible. I guess also you could glitter dust it. Break out the emergency glitter.
Yeah. See, in a tabletop game, and it's possible that if I, wrestle with the UI enough, I can figure out how to do this. But in the tabletop game, I would have just said, okay, I'm going to have Selwyn ready a glitter dust for when it attacks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which, like, a computer can definitely understand a command like that, but programming in a ready action command that complex is a lot of hassle. Precisely because, like, you aren't breaking ground with game AI with that, right? Like, it's not an exciting problem. It just requires a lot of effort. So, it's exactly the kind of thing you probably won't bother with in your game, particularly since it only comes up rarely.
This should do it.
But yeah, it's really vital to dealing with these monsters like the Will-O-Wisp, where they have no particular reason to remain visible except for short slices of time. And the way I run them is that, I'll basically have them, they'll alternate between being visible and invisible on separate rounds because of the exact way I structure their action economy, which is a house rule, but which is also necessary to, making them, playable, I guess, actually interesting to... Because as it is, Will-O-Wisps are like, if you're not very specifically built to fight this thing, or just, like, 4 levels higher than its CR, then you can get fucked.
They're extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
Like, they're immune to spells, they have a super high AC, they turn in... Like, what are you supposed to do to these Will-O-Wisps?
And I did not do this for our Pathfinder game, but, like, as a result of that game, I was kind of thinking that maybe I should. Which is, like, I don't think Will-O-Wisps need to be immune to spells.
Yeah, it's not like that is in the folklore. It's not like you read about a Will-O-Wisp and there's always, like, the dude tried to cast a fireball on it, and it was immune. Also, annoying thing about Will-O-Wisp, like, I get it, like, this is... when they changed from 3.5 to Pathfinder, like, they changed enough that they could have changed this. Why are they aberrations? They should clearly either be, like, either undead or fae.
Yeah. Aberration was a weird choice in the first place.
Like, I have no idea why there were aberrations in 3.5. Pathfinder easily could have changed that. Nobody would have cared. I don't think they even have changed it for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I think there's still aberrations. Another monster that has aberration type, which clearly should be something else, are Naga. Naga should clearly be dragons. Like, come on. Dragons or magical beasts, why are they aberrations?
I mean, I will defend the Naga a little bit. I mean, I'll admit that I have a slight inkling that this might be justifiable, and I'm going to follow that because it's content. Like, I'm not committed to this, but, an aberration being just a weird conglomeration of a creature. An aberration is a weird type to begin with, but what else do you make a beholder? Like, I can see... Granting that it's a hodgepodge...
How is a Naga like a beholder? How is a Naga and a thing?
Well, and it's kind of like the vermin type, where it probably shouldn't exist at all, but now that it does, you can, it's like working with creative constraints. You can work backwards to find an interesting reason for it to exist, which, as I had feared, the more I explored this, the more I kind of realized that, yeah, I don't actually disagree.
Aberrations are like alien Lovecraftian things. Like, where Nagas are hybrids, but, like, lots of monsters are hybrids. Monsters are, like, frequently definitionally hybrids. A lot of monsters are liminal things. Like, original description of a unicorn is it's a hybrid of all these different animals. Like, it doesn't make a unicorn an aberration. Like, and nagas are basically the Indian equivalent, the Indian and Southeast Asian equivalent of dragons. They serve a very similar role. Dragons are basically evolved snake monsters. Nagas should be dragons.
Yeah, and like, a chimera is literally synonymous with a monster that is made of weird things.
And it's just a magical beast.
So yeah, I do like the idea of the origin of Naga being some bizarre magical experiment, but
if you make that your origin, I guess you can justify it, but they're not given that origin.
which yeah, that is a retroactive thing. Okay, now where is? Oh, here we go. There's the Ray of Frost that I accidentally removed instead of actually using. Which,
And
in
then
fairness,
there's that one like lionfish jellyfish hybrid that I showed you a picture of.
Oh,
yeah. Now what type is that creature?
that was a Fae.
Yeah.
When you showed it to me and asked me to guess what type it was the first time, right before you had already told me. My response was, well, you wouldn't be asking if it was an aberration, because it should obviously be an aberration. Like, it's got tentacles, for God's sake. It's a weird aquatic sea monster that's got aberration written all over it. But yeah, no, I mean... And I guess, Pathfinder Fae stand for nothing, mean nothing, so... Like, fuck it, orcs are Fae now. Why not?
Away, you rascals!
Funnily enough, Banshee, which is a word that literally means fairy woman, are not Fae.
Oh, are they not? Are they undead?
Banshee are undead. The Bavanshi is Fae.
Christ. Now, in
That's
fairness...
at the game or at the Banshee versus Bavanshi.
Well, no, I mean...
This should do it.
At Banshee versus Babanshi, because... And I know this is a mildly annoying battle, but, I mean, it's not... Really, after Centipalooza, nothing's going to faze me until it gets at least that bad. But, like, you can hear the similarity in the creatures between Banshee and Babanshi, right? Like, they've got the same suffix. You can tell they have strong similarities. Now, like, in fairness to Pathfinder, I don't think they originated the Banshee as an undead.
They did not, and that, it is justifiable, especially, like, what they did is the way I think you do it when you've got, like, you can do, that gives you an opportunity to do two different interpretations of the creature. Like, if the Banshee and the Bavanshi were both Fae, that would actually be worse. Like,
That is true.
like, they have the siren and harpies as being separate things, and like, yeah, they're technically different things in Greek mythology, but like, just barely. And they have, like, the siren is essentially just a slightly higher CR harpy that is a magical beast instead of a monstrous humanoid. That's not justifiable for putting as a new creature. Like, if you want to have a siren after the harpy, you've got to do something new with it. And that's an opportunity to do something new and weird with it if you're going to do something like that, but they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, sirens are often aquatic theme for no fucking reason at all. But there's a, as weirdly baseless in the original myths as that is, there is a tradition there that you can draw on.
You offend
Yeah, the whole siren
Yeah.
thing, like, that is so common that in a lot of romance languages, the word for mermaid.
So yeah, like, I complain about how it's not faithful to the original myths, but to be clear, that ship has sailed. I'm just bitching about it.
But with Gorgons and Medusa, uh, those are Medusa is a Gorgon technically, but usually in D&D they do Medusa as the species of snake-haired ladies, and then they do some
Right.
weird bull, and that's totally justifiable. Like, I can 100% get behind that. Now, with the Givenchy, as long as we're talking about the Givenchy, we might as well talk about this. Givenchy literally means fairy lady. For the second edition art, it's a dude, which like Pathfinder that was for them. It's probably the best choice. Like they clearly cannot handle. They cannot handle the responsibility of having single-sex races.
Yeah.
In the second edition bestiary,
It's
oh boy.
yeah,
In the second edition bestiary, every formerly single-sex species was switched over to being a male. So they've got like the Rusalka, and it's a guy, and they got the Nereid, and it's a guy, and then now they are not single-sex, and they just have the sample art be a dude, which was probably the best choice for Pathfinder. Like I like single species just because I think that's makes it interesting and more fantasy-like.
yeah.
But
It's a weird. Not only is it kind of alien and inhuman,
Time is
but
over.
it's also it places them outside sexual reproduction, which places them outside almost every living thing that exists on real Earth. So it gives it a very good fantasy flair to it. That this is not definitely otherworldly. You could imagine in a sci-fi context like fungal aliens who reproduce via spores, that kind of thing. But still, it is a very fantastic creature by default. Nevertheless, if I were given control of the Pathfinder line, like effective immediately, I would not do single-sex species for a good long while. Like, I'd give it at least a couple of years, because people are justifiably wary of Pathfinder doing this kind of thing. And so, I feel like there is, as a show of good faith, right? Like, you've got to back away from that concept for a while, just to prove that you aren't obsessed with it, the way that Pathfinder has been in the past. Obsessed with the creepy, weird version of it.
Because they always make them, not only it's a lady, it's always got to be a sexy naked lady a lot of times. Like, so you got the Lampad. In Greek mythology, the Lampads are the nymphs of the underworld, and there's not really an underworld in Pathfinder, so they made them nymphs of like the underground, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, actually, I like that interpretation of it, like that part of it.
In Greek mythology, they are, they're servants of Hecate, and they wear robes. That's a symbol of the underworld. Now, what do they look like in Pathfinder?
I mean, they are naked ladies made of lava.
No, they're like dark elves, but,
Oh, are they?
naked.
Ah.
Yeah.
I must have been misremembering them as cooler than they were. Oh yeah, no, that's it, because I wound up using Lampads in Dreampunk, which is not nearly ready for production, so don't expect a full explanation of that anytime soon. I say not nearly ready. I mainly just have to finish the bestiary, but I really don't like working on the bestiary for that game, so don't expect it to be finished anytime soon. It's also, I don't expect it to have a whole lot of broad appeal. A whole lot of explanation for why I'm not going to explain something to you, because what I want to explain is that for Dreampunk, having things associated with the four elements was important to a lot of stuff. I wound up using Lampad as either earth, or I think I used them as fire, with the idea of tying them to lava to sort of make them, underground and yet fiery, like the Earth's core. So I think that's how I got those wires crossed.
Tire.
They are not
And-
sexy naked ladies, though. They are just made of lava. They're
In
yeah.
Now we can still find old Beldam here. We might want to rest first and level up.
It's I forgot what we were doing there.
Uh,
Which, as is often the case with these big, huge maps, I don't know why they do the big, huge maps. Like, big, huge
in,
maps are things to be explored unto themselves. They should not be like a subunit of something you're already exploring.
yeah. In the tabletop we played, one of Sullivan's Fae friends was Lampad, her name was Lethe. She was a friend of the World Shakes at His Steps, who was a Fae like giant turtle who the art I ended up using for him was of a realistic Torterra. I like the idea that he's essentially like a piece of land that had animated himself that Lethe lived in, and just wherever he went, she went because that's her house.
Yeah. Like, it was a pair of roommates who got on really well, and one of them is the room.
And the art I used for her was not of a spooky, like, pale girl who has, like, mushrooms growing out of her eyes, which I felt hit the theme of underground creature better.
Yeah, I can barely remember her. She came in towards the end.
Yeah, right
And-
before Apocalypse happened, and I don't know that I ever got to summon her.
Yeah, I don't think she got summoned even once. I do remember... I remember her relationship with World Shakes at His Steps, because that is my favorite... Like, those two together are, like, my favorite of the Fae friends. But, yeah, tragically cut short.
I don't know why
You
they're
don't
pushing
need
you to take
point-blank shot, you've got a
ranged-
sword.
Yeah. Oh no, do you have power attack yet? World Shakes at His Steps was like MVP, like, because at the same time I got him as a summon, I got a rod of giant summoning, so he was like, he might have been gargantuan even.
Certainly very big. He was at least huge, and I think gargantuan, yeah.
So he could rock the house. When we fought the Winter Lord, like it almost looked bad just because Sullivan summons him, and then the Winter Lord immediately turned him into ice, and it was like, uh-oh, but we still ended up kicking the Winter Lord's ass.
Alright, we're gonna dive back in to see if we can find anything.
So the thing with like back to the single sex races in Pathfinder is it always ended up being an excuse for
Yeah.
having sexy naked ladies, and they would miss points where like it could have been a hot guy, like single sex races that are all male are relatively just because of the whole sexism of male as the default. But there are in folklore and fantasy there are races that are all male, like the satyr or the fossogrim, which I may be mispronouncing that. It's like Scandinavian, so I don't know.
Yeah, like the satyr is such an obvious place to have your sexy male. Like, if you are doing a kitchen sink fantasy, you are going to have a satyr, like inevitably. That's pretty far down the list of necessary monsters, but it's definitely on the list. So unless you are for some reason limited to a specific number of monsters that's relatively low, like you can only do 30 or something, then you will have a satyr in your kitchen sink fantasy, and they should be a hot guy from the waist up. There's just no reason not to. And I do want to say, for the record, I'm pretty sure I bring this up every time, but I'm going to keep bringing it up because it is important. If you are making the niche game where it's like you're the Monster Girl Encyclopedia RPG or whatever, where it's like, yeah,
Dungeons and Twinks.
yeah, even if you're doing the straight version, where it's like, yeah, all the monsters are sexy girls, or in the Dungeons and Twinks version, they're all sexy twinks. Those are both perfectly fine things to have as your brand. You know, put that name on the cover, put some sexy monster on the cover, advertise what you're doing up front. That is fine. But that's not Pathfinder. Pathfinder is a general audience's thing. You know, it's not a niche market. It's supposed to be the kitchen sink fantasy,
You offend me.
right? Like, if it has a niche at all, it's a purely mechanical niche of we have a lot of customization options, right? Which is very specifically the kind of thing of, oh, you can build any kind of character you want. And leaving aside the fact that they did not necessarily do a very good job of this, I do think, for the record, they've done a better job of it than basically any other major RPG. After 10 years, it is kind of a shame they haven't done any better, but that's the option you have, so in fairness. But that is exactly the kind of thing where it's like, you obviously, your whole thing is about you can be whatever, so of course your monster manual should not be this bizarrely niche thing, especially not where 80% of your monsters are generic fantasy monsters, and then 20% of them are from Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Like,
It's just like
you're crossing genres, which is something that requires a delicate touch under the best of circumstances, and you're doing it in an exclusionary way on in the middle of a game that is selling itself on the ability to be anything within the fantasy genre, sure, but that's a broad genre.
it's like there's stuff that like not only like the Kelpie easily could have been a hot guy, and even if you didn't have it be a hot guy, like you don't need to make it like, because the Kelpies are more often dudes than women, but if you want them to be both sexes, that's fine. But in Pathfinder, they made them specifically all women. Like, you get the impression sometimes that nobody at Pathfinder men. Like, they cannot fathom the idea of finding men attractive.
Yeah, like, it's not
It's
just that
weird.
no one on the staff finds men attractive personally, but also that it seems like the possibility doesn't seem to occur to them. Like, especially with the Kelpie, where it's like they specifically write it as, yeah, only women, because, well, Kelpie is, a sexy person who drowns people, and clearly only women are ever sexy. No one is attracted to men. That's not how that works.
And they walk past it, the opportunities to have it be a sexy guy. So the satyr, the incubus, the fossogrim are all like, these should be sexy dudes. And yet the satyr is just a regular dude, the incubus is kind of ugly, and the fossogrim is like weird looking. Like,
What's that?
and then they attempted to change it up a little with second edition, but the art has been just a general downgrade. Like, they made the Nereid a dude, but he's not particularly sexy. Like, the second edition Nereid is a guy, and he looks very similar to the first edition Nereid art, but like, he doesn't come off as a hot guy. Like, one, because the face is kind of weird, but also like, he's wrapped in a shroud, but like, it's covering a lot of skin. It's not very form-fitting. He looks kind of dry when the female Nereid looked very clearly wet. Like, there's some art direction issues.
Yeah, comparing the first and second edition Nereids to each other, the second edition one, the male version, is very clearly cargo culting. I say very clearly. I wasn't in the room when it was drawn. I can't say for sure. It looks very clearly like it's cargo culting, and that is enough to be a problem. If they were entirely aware of that problem and intentionally set out to avoid it, then good for them. They failed super hard. Speaking of satyrs, by the way.
The thing with satyrs, like, you can try to make the justification, like, oh, well, a lot of the are ugly, they're kind of monstrous, but like, the Pathfinder satyr is not really monstrous. It's just a completely regular-looking dude with goat legs. Like, that's clearly not what they were going for. They were clearly just going for a regular dude. Like, if you wanted to do monstrous satyr, you can do that. If you want to do Pan's Labyrinth, you can do that.
Yeah.
If you're not doing Pan's Labyrinth, you might as well do a hot guy.
Because, satyrs are traditionally, like, symbols of male sexual activity. So, like, obviously they should be sexy. are not enough words, but there are enough feather tokens.
I'll share my path.
Hey, are you a scythe tree?
So this dryad showed up in the tabletop, but I think she was a little different. That is not the scythe tree. It's at the very bottom right of the map.
Alright. If they're going to have a big explorable map like this, the fact that they have a couple of different points of interest scattered across it is definitely the way to go, so at least there's that. It could be worse.
How cute!
We cannot be defeated.
We've been running into a lot of werewolves.
And I believe every single one of them has been a greater werewolf. I don't think they have a single non-greater werewolf.
In my own playthrough, I have not run into a single werewolf, so I don't know why you... I guess the game recognized your love of them. You did admit it on camera.
Yeah, well, I am legally obligated not to comment on that.
Can it be the end? Let's try this way.
This is one of these things that video game cannot handle, because like they're werewolves, but in the tabletop, you fight a werewolf, you've got a chance of becoming a werewolf. Not complete non-factor in the video game.
I mean, you can program that kind of thing into a video game, but in fairness, it is a ton more work. So, like, I understand why they do not usually do it, but,
Also, it's really frustrating that Pathfinder never even really tried to make vampires or werewolves playable. They gave you Dompiers and Skinwalkers, which were terrible, and also in the case of Skinwalker, kind of gross and appropriative.
yeah. That they stole a fairly important, the English translation of a fairly important name from the Navajo and made absolutely no attempt to actually represent the Navajo concept, which would have been bad regardless of the fact that the Navajo, in general, specifically do not want that concept shared with outsiders, which I do not think is wise on their part, but it is ultimately their decision, and I respect that. And Paizo should too.
And the whole they did this thing where Heroes of Horror, where they acted like, oh, this is actually just for NPCs, but it's like, you could already make an NPC werewolf or vampire. You didn't need to make any new things to do that. You need to come out. I want to see the attempt, and you did not even really make an attempt. And it's very obvious something you should be trying for in your Fantasy Kitchen Sink game is at some point being like, oh, okay, here's how you play a werewolf, here's how you play a vampire. It doesn't seem like it should be that difficult for werewolves specifically. You need a hybrid form, and that's basically it. And I realize that's something that's so strong enough that it's hard to do for a starting character, but I don't know,
yeah, it seems like you should be able to figure it out. And
it's your job.
Yeah, in the course of about 1 year, I created a set of aspect classes, and that contained, I don't want to say a playable vampire and a playable werewolf straight out. The werewolf in particular is caught up in the hunter's aspect of the lichen, which involves turning into all kinds of weird things, whereas someone who wants to play a werewolf might reasonably want to play just a werewolf and not all of these other things. Part of the design goal of the class is that every single morph, every single war form you could get would have some kind of utility, no matter how much you unlocked others. But ultimately, for most situations, when you're like level 16 or whatever, and you have the dragon form, you are best off turning into a dragon person because dragon is in the name of the game, so it gets preeminence.
Yeah.
So in fairness, that isn't really a werewolf. But I'll note that I got closer than Pathfinder did in 1 year than they got in 10 years, and with multiple writers. That shouldn't happen.
Well, like, one of the things we didn't mention about aspect classes is, like, you've thought about, like, if you had, like, the resources of Pathfinder, you would also have done, like, either, like, aspect archetypes or, like, prestige aspects that would have had a little more, would have done stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
probably
for, like,
archetypes, because in Pathfinder's defense, I do think archetypes are a major improvement on what 3rd edition was doing with prestige classes.
and so for the aspect hunter, like, you'd probably have, like, a wolf archetype that was more focused, and, like,
Right.
you might know people, like, who have ideas about stuff like that, but I mean, I don't know any.
I'm sure I could find someone if I looked hard enough.
Yeah.
Like, for example, maybe if I just turned my head to the left, I would just see a non-specific werewolf fan there. Just as a hypothetical example.
It's a good thing I'm standing to your right.
This will hurt.
But, like,
Let's try this way.
I guess, like, with if you want to have, like, being a werewolf be, like,
The plan.
such a huge focus of the character, like, because, like, the werewolf, like, the thing about the werewolf is, like, it's more important than being an elf or a dwarf, but it's significantly less important than being, like, a sorcerer. What you can try to do is, like, there are a bunch of, like, mythical wolves, so, like, at the very end of, like, instead of turning into a dragon, you turn into, like, Fenris or something, and you can, like, look at stuff, like, that wolves are associated with, so, like, you can get, like, hunting powers or even, like, winter powers. Like, you turn into a winter wolf or, like, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, if I were being paid to, I'm very confident I could come up with a version of the Lycan aspect that would work for exclusively a werewolf.
Strike with all your might.
And, like, I want to be clear here, it's not that I am an unstoppable genius. Alright, it's that I gave it my all, and Pathfinder also could have given it their all, and they just didn't.
Like, I think the vampire for aspect necromancer works pretty well because vampires just conceptually contain more than werewolves.
Yeah.
Like, on that scale of, like,
Because the
race to
vampires
class,
do have,
like-
tons of weird abilities I was able to slot in. Like, at some point, you gain the ability to turn into a wolf as a vampire, because Dracula did that at one point. Not a werewolf hybrid form, to be clear. You can turn into a regular wolf, but still. Which is an utterly bizarre ability that is not really, in any meaningful way connected to their primary abilities, which are all about blood manipulation. But because vampires can turn into bats, very famously, and if you are a little bit more familiar with some of the deeper vampire lore, you know about Dracula turned into a big, mean black dog at one point, and such things. So there are these weird abilities, charm and domination abilities. Some of them were just Vampire the Masquerade references. There was a ton to draw on for stuff you can do as a vampire that had very little to do with the core idea of blood manipulation. Whereas werewolf, you turn into a werewolf hybrid monster form. And that's about the limit of it. You can definitely do some stuff with, like, enhanced strength and speed and senses, especially senses, even outside of your full-on wolf form. But
Yeah,
like, there's definitely more there, but you run into the thing with, like, the lists of 10 or 12 or 13, whatever number you decide is, most clicks with you, where you give yourself a category where, the first 3 or 4 abilities are obvious. but then you commit yourself to getting a list of 13 of them, and now you're reaching. You will probably find some good stuff to reach for, but you've got to dig. Sure, that's probably as good as anything.
And the main issue is like it's a powerful race, but it's not that powerful. So what you do with
Right.
it is not clear, particularly in something like Pathfinder, where your race is supposed to be pretty minor, but then it can't just be a class.
An idea I've heard that I like for 5th edition, but that I find a little bit clunky for Pathfinder, is the idea that it can replace some of your magic item slots. I think the problem with that in Pathfinder is that in Pathfinder you have your big 6 magic items, which is 6 out of your... I believe it's usually agreed that 8 is a reasonable number of magic items, although that number varies because the actual way of assigning magic items in Pathfinder is based on body slots, which means the exact number you can have varies based on a couple of things. But using 8 as a rough guide, 6 out of your 8 are occupied by the fact that in order to remain on the balance scale, right, you have to have a magic weapon of, plus X, depending on your level. You have to have magic armor. You have to have a ring of protection and an amulet of natural armor and a cloak of resistance and a stat boost to whatever your primary stat is, whether that's a belt of dexterity or a headband of charisma, whatever it is you're using. So with so many of your magic items already spoken for, losing some of them is just, very, very costly in the sense of removing your ability to do interesting, weird things, because now basically all of your magic items are tied up, just keeping your numbers at the level they need to be. Which I don't like that trade-off so much as in 5th edition, because in 5th edition you are not expected to have magic items at any particular level, so you are not balanced around that. Frankly, the monster manual is not very well balanced, period. But, after you've GM'd it for a bit, you do eventually, and this has been true of every edition except for 3rd edition, which had a CR system that mostly worked. There are famous exceptions of monsters whose CR was hilariously wrong, but these are famous exceptions, and for 90% of them, CR actually just worked, which has not been true of really any other edition. And by 3rd edition, I am including both 3.0, 3.5, and Pathfinder. They all managed to get that working pretty well. Good for them.
Why do we never run into regular treants, by the way?
I have no idea.
It's always something like treant.
Oh, a straightforward solution to the problem of not being able to use magic item slots as a balance the way you can race or class, right? To help fix the werewolf problem if they're more important than a race but less important than a class, so what do you do with them? Magic item slots are handy because they're more fungible. And if you have a rule that every magic item always has a cool enchantment on it in addition to a numerical bonus, then you can actually afford to lose some of them without necessarily breaking your character. Depending on how much you like the idea of a +1 sword, you can also just build the magic item progression directly into character progression and allow magic items to be, like 5th edition, used exclusively for neat, weird tricks. I say exclusively 5th edition. It does actually have boring +1, +2, +3 weapons, but they're rare enough that you aren't especially likely to necessarily get your hands on one. But yeah, there's the thing, though, that people like upgrading their equipment. So
This should do it.
Which I do feel like there's been kind of a confused discussion of the problem, but suffice to say, the problem is hard to solve, so... These guys are tricky. Gone to so much effort to try and find a hag. Just because she wound up featuring so prominently. I don't think this one specifically was actually a relatively minor. She was just Mother Sorrow's friend. But,
Well, like, her name's Old Beldame, like La Beldame Sans Merci, which was the poem that inspired Selwyn. I did not use a painting of La Beldame for her art, but it was another John William Waterhouse painting.
A calculated
It was actually of Ophelia, but, like, I told you that was a picture of La Beldame Sans Merci, I think you would have believed me.
yeah, I mean...
Your time is over.
There was definitely... I don't know, because she didn't end up being an extremely important character, but I still feel like she was thematically important. We gotta go, you know, see what she's... Oh, that's right, you're a ranged character. What the hell am I doing? Oh, well. Like, for whatever reason, I keep wanting him to, instead of, like, firebending at them, I want him to go up and punch them with fists that, like, have fire on them.
Which is closer to what he did as in the tabletop. Like, because he was a salamander, so he had, like, a spear. Pull up the map. Alright, so I think directly to the left is going to be Old Beldame's house.